Hey, friendo, Steve here.
And Larson.
And you're watching Tom Talks Rubbish.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talk Rubbish, and today I'm back with another interview. You know who this is if you're a wrestling content creator or wrestling content fan. Today, I can't even say where she's from because she does so much, but I'm joined by Ella J. So welcome to the show, Ella.
Hello. I guess you could say from Buffalo, New York. There's always that route too.
Yes.
So.
All right, in ring announcer style, from Buffalo, New York.
There we go.
So if we take this back from the beginning, where does your wrestling fandom begin?
With this man right here, Jeff Hardy. This was 2009, the summer. I was in middle school at that point, and middle school, it's a tough time for a lot of people, including myself. Yeah. So it was a Friday night. I was flipping channels. And then I see this guy with cool face paint. It ends up being Jeff Hardy versus CM Punk in a loser leaves town match. So literally his last match, at least within that run before he returned in 2017. So I just remember being so captivated. I'm like, who is this like charismatic enigma? Who is this guy? And then he was leaving. I got so emotional. I already instantly felt attached to him. He got me hooked on wrestling. And then he was gone. But I did watch Friday Night SmackDown every week after that with like DX would pop up on there, like Rey Mysterio, John Morris and Batista, Mickey James and Lay Cool. Those were like my really first introduction to wrestling. And then I found Raw. I went to my first live event later that year. And really ever since then, coming up on 13 years, it'll be this summer. I've been a fan ever since, but it definitely wouldn't have started without Jeff Hardy.
Wow. That's just a thought for me that I've been a fan for 13 years as well, because I got into wrestling the same time as you.
That's amazing.
Out of, just to level the playing field, it was Batista versus Rey Mysterio that got me into it.
That was a huge feud. Like you would have Undertaker in there sometimes too. Like I definitely remember that before Ray, after that transition to like a feud with Straight Edge Society, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, that was a great fun time. Friday Night SmackDown, that roster was amazing.
The feud kicked off, with people that don't know, was the heel turn at Bragging Rights, when Batista was saying to Rey Mysterio, "You were supposed to be my friend," and he threw him into the barricade.
Yes.
And I do apologize. I should not talk about myself on these things.
No, it's all good though. I don't meet a lot of people who found wrestling virtually around the same time I did, because they're either like way before in Ruthless Aggression or they found it like 2010s.
So why do you think, if we're talking about the 2009 era, that is so underappreciated, maybe?
I think because this was also during the transition, like 2008, 2009, when they were going from TV 14 to PG, like around 2008, I think was the year that they officially switched over. So they were entering a new era. It wasn't as ruthless. It wasn't as some things would be obscene. They definitely not lowered their level, but kind of like gravitated more towards the child audience, I guess, a children demographic, a younger demographic. And I guess I was considered in that demographic because I was 11, 12 years old at that point. And so I think maybe that's why I found it more enjoyable too back then too. But maybe I don't know. I know a lot of people prefer Ruthless Aggression or Attitude Era, but I mean, I found it right when they started the PG era.
If you were to discover wrestling at the age you are now with that exact era that you discovered when you first discovered, do you think you'd be a fan?
So we're saying if I was like 11, 12 years old right now.
No. If you were the age you are now, but you discovered wrestling, the wrestling that you discovered at 11, 12 years old.
I think I would still enjoy it because there was still some great characters at that point. Like Shawn was on his last leg, Taker, Batista, like John Cena, Rey Mysterio were still all in that. It's still a lot of the guys that I feel like a lot of people respect. Like Edge just had returned in 2010. So I think so because the group of talent back then was still amazing. And so I think I still would, yes.
What is one thing that, because as we both say, we really appreciate that era because it's what we grew up on. But what is it that you would recommend from someone, for someone, should I say, that hasn't seen that era to go back and watch to maybe appreciate it a bit more?
D-Generation X's last run, I am one who find like Shawn Michaels is my favorite of all time. And I was really brought in by the humor side of things too. Like with their DX Christmas commercials, they won the unified tag team titles. They were hilarious. And then Edge coming back too, like Edge, Randy Orton was huge too. But if you're looking like if you want entertainment, DX is definitely one to watch. But you also had people you love to hate. Like Chris Jericho at that point was calling people parasites, and the crowd hated him. And the crowd hated CM Punk with Straight Edge Society. But on the other hand of that, he was going against like Rey Mysterio, who is completely underrated and an absolute icon. So definitely those are some points to look at, definitely too. And I mean, even the divas like Michelle McCool at that point was doing great. Melina, Mickey was just on her way out at that point, but like you had Beth Phoenix. I feel like that's a really underrated era though, with some amazing talent.
You talked about women's wrestling there, and we will get into all of your accomplishments in a minute. I'm just very curious to know, do you think if the women from the 2009 era were time machine with the same abilities that they have now into the current era where WWE and wrestling in general seems to respect women's wrestling more, do you think they would thrive? Thrive, should I say?
Yeah, I think so. Like if you take like a Michelle McCool, a Mickey James, a Melina, a Layla and Eve Torres. I mean, Kelly, regardless whether you like her in-ring ability or not, is an undeniable baby face. People love her. She has that drawing ability. Everybody has their own strengths and weaknesses. And I think, though, definitely Michelle, like Melina and Mickey and like Beth specifically, though, had great in ring abilities. They just weren't always given the proper opportunity or time to showcase them. I think they could absolutely go if they could transport into the future, like right now. Absolutely. Like they would, I feel like they would vibe and mesh really well with a lot of the current girls.
That's really cool to hear. But if we move on to like your work in the wrestling media, what was your first sort of foray? Was it the Agal Wrestling podcast? Was that first?
Yes, a Wrestling Gal podcast was first before everything. That was the summer of 2019 it started.
Okay. So what was the initial seed of an idea for that?
I had graduated college with my bachelor's in December of 2018, was taking a semester off, but getting ready to go to grad school that summer or later that fall. So during that winter, spring semester, I had to get everything like the interview, like get enrolled and all of that. I was set to go to grad school and had done the whole process, but then I unenrolled and I was like, I don't know if this is really what I want to do because a master's is a big commitment and a lot of money. So I was like, I'm just going to take maybe another semester or a year off, but I needed to fulfill my time somehow. I did have, like, as they say, a shoot job, a day job, whatever you want to call it at that point, but I needed something else to do time wise since I was
A
going to
creative
take
outlet almost.
yeah, basically, yeah. And so I'd always been into pro wrestling, and like my friend whose whose interview you listened to for this, Samira, who was on my first ever
I did, as
episode,
it happens.
I've been friends with her for 8 years now. She had been in wrestling media and doing interviews for like a year up to that point. And I also loved listening to podcasts like Alicia Toot and like Chris Van Fleet. And so I was like, I love conversing with people, and I I had been a closeted wrestling fan in my high school and like middle school for the longest time, but it was something I was really passionate about. So I feel like it gave me an outlet to talk about it. So that's kind of how a wrestling gal was born. I wanted a hobby during a time off from school. I looked up to a lot of people like my friend Samira, and wrestling is something I'd been passionate about for 10 years up until that point. And so I feel like it was an outlet. Yeah, a creative outlet is a good way to look at it. I definitely think so.
That was exactly the same for me, funny enough. That's how Tom Talks Rubbish started during the pandemic. Like, I was stuck at home and it was like, I need something to do.
Yeah,
So
definitely too. I feel like too, as a female too, like I kind of said earlier, I feel like I felt like suppressed with my voice in wrestling because like I said, I'd been a closeted fan and I also wanted an outlet to talk about something that I had been really passionate about too.
before I ask you some questions about a gal wrestling podcast, and if I'm butchering that name, I do apologize.
Oh, good. It's a wrestling gal, but close
A
enough.
wrestling gal podcast, sorry. You talked about maybe not getting as much respect as a female wrestling fan. Do you think that since women's wrestling is getting more respect, female wrestling fans are beginning to get more respect?
I think so too. I feel like ever since the pandemic, when a lot of people have been starting like their own creative outlets or podcasts or content creation, more and more women have been in pro wrestling. And so I think it's become more saturated and the numbers have been growing in women, like representation, not only like wrestlers, but like women in wrestling too, in whatever role they identify with. And so I think we've definitely been increasing our numbers, and people have proved that we are knowledgeable and we are capable and we are passionate about this sport. And so I think gradually people have become more respectful and cognizant and more accepting of our viewpoints. Not that they shouldn't be, because ours are just as valuable as somebody else's in this male dominated sport, but definitely too, I think our voices are being heard more and appreciated more.
Taking women's wrestling out of the equation, what is something you feel like female wrestling fans understand maybe a bit more to male wrestling fans?
I think I think it's I don't know, maybe not having as many outlets or opportunities as our male counterparts. I feel like, especially, I mean, even just in women, even just in wrestling alone, like it's dominantly like males taking up TV time and stuff like that. I feel like maybe we aren't getting as many opportunities or stuff like that. Again, I've only been doing this like less than 3 years. There's definitely more improvement too for people to maybe take us seriously, because like I said, people respect us more, but it's still not to the height to where it should be. I think I
Where
feel
it's
like
50-50
yeah,
almost.
exactly. So I feel like it's always a struggle or a journey to reach that, to ascend new heights and to get people to take us more seriously in our voices and our knowledge and our work.
Okay. So what is it that you feel like makes your podcast, a Wrestling Gal podcast, different than the other podcasts that are out there?
For me, it's definitely evolved. It's definitely turned into something that I wasn't really anticipating on. When I had started, it was about the female perspective on pro wrestling, like mainly myself or other content creators. I am a female, so regardless if I'm having a guest or not, the female perspective is always present because I am the host of it. But I think it's definitely evolved to where now I predominantly work with a lot of women's wrestlers. I would say it probably takes up about 90% of my episodes are interviews with women's wrestlers, or I will have some fun episodes in there with other content creators or ring announcers or people in the wrestling community. But I think predominantly my work is with a lot of people who are in women's wrestling, some bigger stars, some legends, and also a lot of up and coming independent stars too, I think, as well.
Okay. So do you think that because, and I'm really trying to not sound sexist, so I do apologize, but like, do you think because you cover the female perspective and there's not so many female creators out there, that is what makes your podcast different, maybe?
Maybe. I like I've had multiple people tell me, again, this is not me coming off as something. This, I've been told that like when people think of women's wrestling, they think of me. Like I've been told that multiple times, which is a huge honor because that's something I'm super passionate about, and I think translates through my work, a wrestling gal. I feel like it's pushing that women's wrestling envelope and sharing stories of people who are in the women's wrestling community. Like I said, that's most of the work I do. It's not all the work. That's not all my podcast is, but predominantly I feel like it's sharing stories and thoughts and insights from within the women's wrestling world.
Okay. So if we take this back to the beginning of the podcast, like how did you go about getting your first interview?
My first interview was episode 3. Like I said, starting out, I was not anticipating to do as many interviews as I have, but I quickly realized that you got to be really creative to have like different ideas. Like you can do predictions, you can talk about like events of the past, but also you have to have some tie-ins there. And that's just a lot of creative energy that I don't know if I have all of that in my head. So my first technically my first interview was with Samira. I guess on my first episode that I already had built and we'd been friends forever. But I guess officially my first like women interview within wrestling was with at that time Ring of Honor Women of Honor champion Kelly Klein, who I was also friends with. So my first couple of guests were Samira, Kelly Klein, and Alicia Toot, who I was already had great rapport with. And so it was kind of working with people I was already familiar with and friends with at that point to kind of get me started. Because you don't want to aim too high when you're first starting out. It's definitely good to work with some people who you're comfortable with and who are also comfortable with speaking with you and worth taking, and who are open to taking a chance on you.
Mm-hmm. Who, you talked about taking a chance on you there. Who is the person you are most thankful that they took a chance on you?
It kind of ties in probably to some later questions of yours, but definitely there's 2. I will say I will leave the obvious one for later, but I will say the first one is Deonna Purrazzo. Because the first, when she got released from WWE in 2020, I was not going to reach out to her because I thought she'd be inundated with requests and emails and inquiries, but I was like, I mean, I guess you never know. And so I shot her an email, and shockingly to me, I don't know how she said yes to me, because at that point, I think I maybe only had like 20, 25 episodes out there. There wasn't really much to my name at that point, but she had said yes. And so since then we had built a great rapport and we had a great conversation. And now coming up in April, it'll be like my 8th interview with her in like less than 2 years. It's been crazy. So she's definitely one. And then the obvious one is Mickie James.
Here we go. The questions I wanted to get into.
Yeah, the obvious one is Mickie James, who, I mean, at that point when I first interviewed her, she was signed with WWE. But I had already, like I said, in outgoing, what's the word? Pre-existing like rapport with her. So she said yes. And then obviously that turned into opportunities with GAW TV and Impact Wrestling and all that stuff.
So before we get into your GAW TV work, we spoke about who you're most thankful for them taking a chance on you, but where do you think you would be with your podcast and your work in the wrestling media if, for example, Mickie or Diazzo hadn't taken a chance on you?
I honestly don't think that any of the opportunities would have happened without Mickie James initially bringing me on to GAW TV, because I've said this before that I think it was that relationship, not only like with my podcast, but with Mickie and GAW TV that kind of started this domino effect to now I'm working with multiple wrestling news sites, working with multiple organizations, working with indie promotions, and getting interviews that I don't think I would have gotten otherwise had it not been for that attachment or that accolade with GAW TV and with Mickie bringing me on. So I honestly don't think I would not be where I am right now without her.
So the obvious question is, and you spoke about this a bit in the Samara interview, how did your relationship with the GAW TV crew come about?
Yeah, so I mean, Mickie was the first woman I ever saw on wrestling television in 2009. So I've been a fan of hers for forever. Like, she is my biggest hero in pro wrestling, both in and outside of the ring. And so like I had met her finally in 2017 at a live awards ceremony. She was doing music. It's ironic, the first time I met her in person wasn't even at wrestling. It was at a music event. But and so throughout then I'd been interacting with her on Twitter. I had met her multiple times otherwise throughout 2017 to 2019 at wrestling events and other music and concerts of hers. So we had built a good rapport like that. And then the pandemic started, and then GAW TV started. And so naturally, like, I'm going to support GAW TV and support Mickey. And then so that's where I kind of formed this bond with Lisa and Val as well, because they were part of GAW TV. And at this point, I had already done an interview with Mickey, and they were looking to expand their GAW TV brand. And so Mickey knew that somehow, I mean, she knew that I did my own podcast work and all of that and appreciated it and took a chance on me because she was also looking for some help with GAW TV and her own social media. So I had helped her out with a few TikTok content herself, getting herself started with that. And she knew that I knew the ins and outs of like audio and stuff and had my own podcast. And so they were looking to launch their own podcast. So I guess naturally, she saw something in me. I still don't know what it is to this day, but she took a chance on me. And since then we've become great friends. And so it started with her asking me if I wanted to help them launch their GAW TV podcast. And now here we are, like a year and a couple months later, and it's been wild.
What is the biggest no, I'll ask you that question in a minute. What is the biggest thing that you've taken away, a lesson that the GAR TV people have maybe taught you?
There's a lot that they've taught me. Definitely like networking is really important too, in getting myself out there and to be more confident in my abilities. I feel like, because I'm great friends with Lisa now too. Like I talk to Lisa almost every day now, and she's definitely like gone out of her way to get me some guests on my podcast that I don't think I would have reached out to otherwise due to my own like insecurities. So they've definitely pushed me to get myself out there more and take more chances on myself, because even if I don't believe in myself, they believe in me. So I guess there's always that in the back of my mind, definitely just pushing myself and getting myself out there more.
What is the biggest thing you feel like you may have taught them?
I've definitely taught them a lot about the podcasting stuff, and I've helped them a bit with their merch store. More, I would say more so behind the scenes stuff, like explaining like the podcast, like how to run it, like how to formulate it, like promoting it. And I've also helped them launch like their merch, some of their merch stuff on their Teespring. So I think it's more behind the scenes stuff. Mickey will occasionally text me too and be like, how do I post this to TikTok, or how do I save this GIF? So like literally she has texted me that multiple times, like, how do I save this GIF, or how do I save this video? And so I feel like it's more behind the scenes things, saving them with technology sometimes.
With being such a big fan of Mickey James, is it surreal that you're like, wait, she's technically, well, she is. She's my friend now. Is that a surreal thing?
Very much every day. It's crazy because I mean, not a lot of people get to meet their heroes, let alone like be friends with their heroes and work with them. Like I've said this publicly before, and I still can't even believe it, even talking about it still to this day. I never would have imagined this. Like if you would have told 12-year-old me that I'd have Mickey James on speed dial, I would say that you're lying. But I mean, I've learned never say never in pro wrestling, never say never in life. It's been a crazy journey. It's still surreal to this day.
That's really cool to hear. So if we dig into like your creative process for a Wrestling Gal podcast, what is the one thing you have to do, whether it be research or to get in two hubs really, for research for interviews and then getting yourself into on camera mode? What are the things you have to do to be like, okay, I'm going to record this now? Is there something you have to do beforehand?
Well, definitely always research. Even there's been like about 10 times where I've been somebody's first podcast. So that makes it even more of a challenge, is going based off if there's no other content outside of their own social media to go in otherwise, because I really try to stray away from like the cliche or basic questions, unless in the scenario where
You're not
it's
going to
somebody's
like a segment we've got coming up then.
That's just me personally, though, unless it's somebody's like first podcast or interview and I literally can't find anything.
Mhm.
That's happened a couple of times, and sometimes you have to lean on them to gather a foundation for the person. But otherwise, it's definitely digging into their social media like Twitter and Instagram and listening to other interviews, whether on YouTube, or I'll literally Google like insert wrestler name here, interview, and it'll pop up. Or you go on Spotify or YouTube or Google, or searching their tweets and their Instagram. I always do that. If I can't find anything, I will literally always stalk the shit out of their social media. I definitely have to have my research in order, and I have to have my questions structured on the side. So like normally I'll have Zoom on the side, on one side, and then my notepad app with all my questions structured on the other side too as well. Yeah. And so I have a split screen, like as I normally do interviews, and I'll look over in between. Otherwise, so sometimes you have spontaneous questions and you kind of just go with the flow. But getting into preparation mode, I just be sure I have everything up here, my questions, the person on the side, be sure I sent the Zoom link, and in my mode really. And then once we hit record, I mean, sometimes you have to go off the cuff. I can structure as much as I want, but sometimes the conversation steers otherwise, and you kind of just go with the flow.
Mine is normally, oh, sorry, let me reset my internet because my internet is shit.
Oh, that's happened. That's me too. I like, even before this, I reset it because sometimes I'll turn my computer on and it'll connect, but then it'll like disconnect in a couple minutes. So I reset it before then. Internet is a podcaster's worst enemy. Honestly, especially if you're live, which is why I don't do anything live on my own platforms besides Instagram. I do a couple other live shows for a couple other sites, but I personally don't do live stuff on my own besides Instagram because of my internet.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. But if we dig more into your career in the wrestling, do you consider yourself a wrestling journalist?
I do not. I mean, people have called me that. I consider myself a media personality because I don't have like a formal degree in journalism. I took a couple courses like in undergraduate, but I have a degree in psychology and minored in creative writing. I don't have a degree in journalism. So I will consider myself like a wrestling media personality. Like I write, I interview, host, do commentary, do a lot of things, but I do not consider myself a full journalist because there's only a few. I don't do news a lot, only really in my writing.
So to peel the curtain back, guys, do you mind, like, if Ella doesn't want me to tell the story, I'll edit it out. I was like, do I introduce you as? Because you've got so many things going on in the pipeline. And she was like, just introduce me as a wrestling personality. Media personality, sorry.
Yeah, people have called me a wrestling journalist, and that's great. Like I take that as a compliment, but I don't have a formal degree in it. So I don't consider myself a journalist. Like I do a lot, but I think just generally I a wrestling media personality, I guess you would say.
So what is the thing, before we go on to a couple of segments that I do in every interview called generic questions, and then as we wrap up do some wrap-up questions, what is the part of your job that you are most proud of?
Oh man. Honestly, I love doing interviews. I mean, writing is great. Hosting is great with certain stuff, but I really, for the most part, I would say 95% of my interviews have gone well. There's only a handful of them where I'm like, oh gosh. But I would say most of my interviews go great. I love, and maybe that's the psychology major in me. Like I love conversating with people and getting to learn their stories. Like one-on-one or whatever in small groups and stuff like that. Like I love learning and picking at people's brains and learning more about them. So for me, I think that's what I love doing. And also like building connections with people in the pro wrestling community has been so fun. I mean, covering wrestling is great too, but I really love doing interviews with people. I think that I've definitely improved. Like even just a few weeks ago, I had somebody tell me who I've interviewed twice at that point, like, and it was the biggest compliment ever, even in the year that in the year apart that I interviewed them, saying that my interviewing skills and like demeanor seemed a lot better, even compared to last year, because I've gotten more confident. And I feel like I've definitely found my groove and found my style because, like I said, I came into this with no degree, no background. It was all self-taught off like YouTube and divulging hours upon hours of content. So I think definitely I've improved a lot, and I still have a long way to go, but definitely interviewing is, I think, my proudest moments.
A two-pronged question about interviewing then. What is the thing you feel like you need to improve on most? And then as I'm interviewing you, what is something you feel like I can improve on?
For me, I feel like everything you can always improve. I mean, maybe time management in giving myself more time to breathe, because my schedule is so stacked up to where sometimes I feel like I'm rushing with things and maybe sometimes don't put forth the best effort, or I will literally get done putting questions together like 5 minutes before an interview because I had something else to do earlier in the day and somehow just make it work.
Before this interview. No.
That's honestly me a lot of days, because I'll have days like tomorrow at the time of filming this where I have 4 podcasts plus a column to write plus a show to film, to where it's everything's just in between and it's on the go. It's like working 15 hours a day from home, that plus a day job. It's hard sometimes to put forth your best effort. So sometimes you kind of just have to wing it. So I guess time management and not in some taking breaks sometimes too. I don't do the best job at that. I bury myself in my work a lot of the time. As for this though, I mean, you've obviously got yourself researched very well. You did an introduction. You asked me ahead of time what I wanted to be introduced as, which is great, which is something I actually sometimes don't do, which is great though, because sometimes, I mean, I will ask beforehand, like, is there a certain name you want or title you want to be introduced as? So that's something I need to do more too as well, especially if the person's like content creator just besides wrestler, you know what I mean? But that was great. You gave me the Zoom link ahead of time. Like that was great. I feel like, I don't know, I feel like we all can improve in our own ways. Like, I don't know, like I wouldn't have known that you only got this together like finished up like 5 minutes before. Like you've clearly done your homework. So I feel like that's within ourselves of what we can improve upon, really. I feel like we're all our own worst critics.
Yeah, I agree with that, because I don't know if you have this, but when I'm watching this back to edit, which, side note, I hate editing.
It's not fun, but somebody's got to do it. Mm-hmm.
I'll be like, why did I say it like this? Why? I'm sure you've had that.
Yes, many, many times. I'm like, I used to hate the sound of my voice when I first started this, which is why my first episode literally took me 8 hours to record and edit, because I kept re-recording because I hated how I said something or hated the sound of my voice. And so, yeah, that's just one example of that, though.
Mm-hmm. So I appreciate all them compliments, because I'll be honest, I don't normally do like a deep dive on research. It was just, she's got such a big following. She's so beloved in the wrestling community, because that's one thing I will say. When I was doing research on you, everyone loves you from what I can see.
I wouldn't say everybody, but I mean, everybody has their negative people, I guess you will say. I will say I am very fortunate to surround myself with a lot of positive people and positive supporters, but there's definitely been people who have gone out of their way to invoke negative comments or energy on me, I will say.
I think when it comes to things like that, you need to go down the old CM Punk route of, you wouldn't listen to those that you wouldn't ask the opinion of those that you don't know, so don't take their criticism almost. And I butchered that quote, and I do apologize.
You're good. I know what you meant. It's definitely, I've never been one to take criticism very well because I'm always one who takes things too personally. I've definitely gotten better, but it's still, I would be lying if I said like I didn't like over psychoanalyze like the mean comments or people on Twitter sometimes.
I asked you earlier what you can improve. Do you think that's something you need to improve on for the future, maybe?
I think so. I think in anything though, it's I like I said, I've gotten a lot better for sure. Like I will not go out of my way and spend hours upon hours like what's the word vanity searching for
I know what you mean.
criticisms or
Yeah.
whatever. I've definitely gone down that rabbit hole and it's just toxic. But like I said,
Don't do
I've gotten better. I've gotten better at like laying low and just if people are annoying me, then I don't feel obligated to go on Twitter or whatever and look at it. I'll distract myself. I've gotten better, but again, it's always something I can improve upon.
May I suggest the cat filter for like your laptop or something? An extension that lets you look at cats or dogs or whatever one that you prefer. That's something
Well,
that
I have two cats, which one of them is actually sleeping beside me. So my own cats definitely keep me preoccupied
that's
still.
something that I do. Like if I'm having a bad day, I go walk my dog or I go like, what do you put in place to make sure with everything that you do basically that you don't become burned out?
In between stuff, I will have like mini dance parties where if I'm home alone, I will turn on my plug into my headphones into my phone and have like I'll crank up my music in my
I
headphones and
thought
have
that
like
was
mini
just
dance
me.
parties. No, I literally do that. I sometimes I have to take breaks and so I will have like mini dance parties for like 10-15 minutes and just jam out. Otherwise though, I watch a lot of YouTube. I really don't have time to watch like full shows anymore to be honest unless it's like my major favorites. So I
What are you
watch a lot
binging currently?
on YouTube or like shows.
Either. And this has gone on a
Um
tangent. I didn't realize we would, but it's cool.
I for TV shows, I don't have time to like really start new shows, but I will always go out of my way to because sometimes I can't watch them live. I'll catch up on Law and Order SVU or NCIS or Survivor is coming up. So when people are gonna come at me, but when Survivor starts, honestly, Wednesday nights are designated to Survivor. I'm sorry, AEW, but when Survivor's on, that's Survivor night. Um, Otherwise, though, like YouTube wise, I watch I watch a lot of like I'm still on that Among Us trend where I will literally there's
Yeah.
a couple streamers I will go out of my way to watch on YouTube even still. Or I'll watch like old like funny like Full House funny moments or there's a couple I watch a lot of nostalgia on YouTube, but honestly, I'm still on that a lot of Among Us train or I watch Smosh too. There's a lot of stuff I watch on YouTube. We'd be here forever or
Fair.
TikTok. So, but that's a whole
Fair.
nother rabbit hole.
Fair enough. What do you do then? I asked you about your pre-interview or content routine, but what is like your post routine? Because I don't know whether you find this, but after an interview, I'm on such a high that I have to have a routine to calm myself down.
I'm kind of the opposite actually. I will sometimes because it takes time for Zoom to download stuff. Sometimes I will just leave my laptop open, leave Zoom open for it to download to my computer downloads, go downstairs, get something to eat, and then come up later in a few hours and then change the file names. I will honestly once I'm done with an interview, if I don't have like something else after, I will just walk away and leave my computer open for it to download because I need some space away. I need to like eat something or just get away from it for a bit unless I have something because sometimes I have back to back like tomorrow, but most of the time I just honestly walk away or I'll go right to my phone. It's one screen to another.
I think the problem for me is, and again, I'm talking about myself. Stop it, Tom. Like the thing is, where I record my interviews so late because I'm in the UK, it's like I do my interviews and I'm expected to go to bed almost.
Yeah, and that sometimes happens with me with time zone differences. Like tomorrow, I have an interview at literally 11 o'clock at night because it's an Australian time zone that I'm working with. So I've had interviews at like midnight before, like 5-6 a.m., like 11 p.m., like very, very different time zones. So I can understand that because time zones sometimes are hard to work with.
Yeah. So like I think that's why I need a calm down routine, if that makes any sense.
No, it makes sense. I've had those late night interviews where literally I will let it save, lay in bed, change the file name, close my computer, and then go to bed. Or I'll go on Twitter, scroll on Twitter for a little bit, and then go to bed.
Yeah, so what I normally do is I change the file, let it download, change the file name, sort myself out so I'm ready for bed. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah,
then
pretty much.
and then put a tweet out being like, just wrapped up a great interview with Ella, for example. Please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss when it goes live.
Yeah, definitely. That's another thing I need to improve upon is promoting more of my stuff. Like I love, honestly, after I record interviews, I'm just like I don't touch it for a couple days or a couple depending on because I pre-film so many episodes and sometimes they don't get put out till 3-4 weeks later. But then I come back to them when it's time to edit them and all of that.
Mm-hmm. So as we move on to a recurring segment in my interviews called generic questions, basically this is the segment where I ask my guest. For those of you that have seen my interviews, you'll know I ask my guest questions that I'm sure they get asked on Twitter a lot, like their favorite match, favorite pay-per-view, favorite superstar, etc. And now this will give them a place to go, okay, I've answered this, go watch this. And also
insert clip here.
It's a bit of self-promotion for me. So, favorite match of all time?
I feel like there's two. So one is an indie one. It's from Rise. I can't remember what year it was, but it wasn't that too long ago. Between Mercedes Martinez and Kylie Ray, it was a no rope submission match, and when I found it, like I instantly fell in love with it. It was great. The story with Mercedes being the heel and Kylie like fighting back as the underdog with literally no ropes, and it was a submission match. It was very unique with its stipulate. And now that I realize it, two of my favorite matches are stipulation matches. But
is it on YouTube that first one?
It is. That's how I found it. It was by Rise, which is now unfortunately what's the word? Not running anymore.
Debunked.
But yeah, but it's a great match. Highly recommend.
That's a scientist thing.
I know what you meant though. Defunct.
That was it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And another one is Bad Blood 2004, Triple H and Shawn Michaels in the steel cage or Hell in a Cell, I guess you would call it. Yeah. That was, again, I love Shawn Michaels and Triple H together or as foes. That for me was, I mean, it's a long match. It's not everybody's cup of tea.
It's like 50 minutes, isn't it?
I know, but I love them.
How did you discover that match when, like myself, you got into wrestling in 2009?
YouTube, honestly, the YouTube rabbit hole goes on and on. Like that's how I found the Rise match. Like just kept clicking related videos. I mean, that's pretty much how I found it.
Okay. Favorite pay-per-view of all time. And this is a two-part question because I will ask you favorite pay-per-view you've been at live in a minute.
Like certain pay-per-view, certain year, or like just in general?
Your favorite pay-per-view of all time, and then I'll ask you like what pay-per-view has been your favorite that you've been at live.
Royal Rumbles are always my favorites. I can name all the Royal Rumble winners in order. I'm so like just the match type, like to me, like WrestleMania is great, Survivor Series is great, but like Royal Rumble matches, like making predictions for those are so fun. And I literally every year watch 40 to 50 like prediction videos for them because it's so fun just to think of all the possibilities, order entries, like interesting spots in there, intriguing eliminations. There's so many potential matchups. I love the Royal Rumble pay-per-view so much. Look forward to it every year for sure.
This was the first year that I didn't watch it because things got out of, do you know what I mean? Got out of control with this and everything. And quite honestly, I think it's the first year that I've been like, okay, I'm not going to rush to go back and watch it because I've heard so much negativity.
Oh yeah, looking back on it, I mean, at least the men's Royal Rumble being very predictable once you realize Brock lost the WWE Championship, it was very predictable. But I must say, like, just like the unpredictability of it though, like just in general, I get so into it every year.
Okay, and then favorite pay-per-view you've been at live?
So I've technically only ever been to one pay-per-view live. And that was last year. I've been to a ton of live events or house. I've been to like
Maybe I should rephrase that question.
Okay.
Favorite show you've been at live?
Favorite show I've been to live. I still think though, there's two. I still think though technically it would be at the one pay-per. Oh, okay. Technically I was at two because they were the same weekend. I guess favorite pay-per-view that I've been to live was in Power last year. That was literally my first ever pay-per-view. Going to that was great live for sentimental reasons, getting to work correspondence there, do interviews there, like personally, and seeing the women make history was great. You have
For
a
people
question?
that
Go
may
ahead.
not know, that was the NWA show, correct? That
Yes, it was.
Mickey James had a hand in producing, correct?
Yes, and I also got to be a part of Melina's paparazzi for her entrance too as well. So
Ooh.
for me, I got to be a part of the show, do backstage correspondence, like for me personally, but also watching it. It was great. But if we're talking about just normal shows, there was I guess it would have been Tuesday. Do you remember the draft split in 2016, like the WWE draft, the really big brand split?
Is this when they split the rosters and Dean Ambrose was WWE champion?
Yes,
and
it was.
Then Finn Balor was going to be Universal champion, but the shoulder thing happened.
Yes, it was. So they had to the draft 2016. I was at the first SmackDown after the draft. And so I was sitting on the ramp about fourth row. I had a sign. Wasn't expecting much of it, but that evening they did the 6-pack challenge to determine the number one contender for Dean Ambrose's WWE championship. So it had like John Cena, Bray Wyatt, AJ Styles, Apollo Crews, Baron Corbin, and Dolph Ziggler.
Wow,
And so
right off the top of their head, people.
I will never forget this night. And so going into this, I'm a big Dolph Ziggler fan, right? And I made a sign for him, which will come into play later. But then shockingly, this was the year where he won. He pinned AJ Styles and became the number one contender at SummerSlam for the WWE Championship. And me not knowing any of this ahead of time made a sign that says it's Dolph's time to shine. And as he won, I held up that sign. They showed that sign. It was on the SummerSlam video package between him and Dean. I met him that night. I was the only person that he like took a photo with that night. Me as a Dolph fan I was not expecting him to win. I was like, oh, he's going to get pinned. He's going to lose. But then he won and pinned AJ Styles. And so I feel like that was just perfect. I had the perfect sign, was seated perfectly. Like they zoom in for him winning. And then in the background, you can see my sign. It was just like perfect all around for me.
Is that personally. Like your biggest fan girl moment sort of thing?
No, I would say it's my second biggest behind meeting Mickey for the first time. For sure. I will tell you though, there's definitely going to be a lot of internal fangirling moments coming up when I go to WrestleMania in Dallas and me meeting a lot of my favorites for the first time. I mean, at the end of the day, I still am a fan. There's still people on my list that I've been waiting to meet that I'm going to meet, and I am so excited.
Okay. So as we wrap up generic questions and we do the question that I end all my interviews on, do you view your time in the wrestling media so far as a success?
I think I've definitely gotten some cool opportunities, but also part of me, I want to do more. Like I said, a lot. I feel like I'm definitely hindered a lot because I don't do this full time. I have a day job. I do a lot, but I do find myself sometimes feeling unfulfilled because I know I could do so much more. And there's been a few instances where I had to pass or miss on an opportunity because I was at said shoot job. Yeah. And so I felt really, really defeated in that. And so I've done a lot, and I don't want to sound ungrateful, but me personally, I want to do so much more, and I know I could, but it's just that making this media thing financially stable for myself. And so that's why my biggest goal is to make this full time. I feel like it's been good so far, but I feel like I could and want to do so much more. But again, it comes with that being financially stable and being full time, if that makes sense.
No, totally. Because like I'm one of those people that's still at the stage where it's like, I get to interview cool people like you. Like, I'm still at that stage, and I don't ever want that to go away. So do you want your overall fandom to go away as a content creator?
No, and I know I've definitely at moments through the last couple of years have found myself like feeling defeated by wrestling because you become so consumed with this, and there is ugly aspects of it, like outside of the on-screen presences, a lot of the backstage stuff that I've been learning and that have come to light the last couple of years. There definitely has been moments where I was doubting, like, is this really what I want to do? But at the end of the day, like, I made a whole career 180, doing nothing with my bachelor's now, and I'm committed to this now. And so there's definitely moments of doubt or moments where I'm like, why am I doing this? But I feel like at the end of the day, I have so much ambition and so much I want to do that it keeps me pushing forward.
2 questions before we do my generic questions. What is the biggest opportunity you've had to pass up on because of your shoot job? And then what is the opportunity that you're just waiting for? Or you want to happen the most, should I say?
I have 2 opportunities that I had to miss on. I had to miss out on going to WrestleMania last year, even though I had an in because I was friends with somebody and they had an extra ticket. So I literally could have done media last year, but me having to work at said shoot job and also like not being able to fully afford to go last year was something I was so devastated about, but it's okay because I'm going this year. And another one,
Oh, I want to be you so bad.
Unfortunately, like I've had to pass up on I had to pass up on an interview with the Inspiration a couple of months ago because I was at work when the time slot was at and it was killing me inside. And a part of me is like, I'm never going to have this opportunity ever again. But there's also been other times where I got a second chance with something and it happened. But those are definitely, I am still so sad that I had to pass up on that.
What is, okay, just this last question. What is the opportunity that came back around again?
I'm trying to think. Now I'm blanking. I'm blanking now. I think, oh yeah. So instead of the Inspiration, I originally was going to interview Mercedes Martinez. But then again, I was stuck at work. But luckily the next week after we made something work. So it came back around. So it's okay.
Wow. And then as we wrap this up, obviously I want to say thank you to Ella for coming on. But the question I end all my interviews on is, with YouTube, with podcasting, with social media in general, we're all sort of going to live forever in some sort of ways, which is a terrifying thought. So what is one video that you're like, if you want to see my body of work, make sure you check that one out? And then what is one that you're like, don't go back and watch that, I've grown a lot since then? Like, one that you wouldn't recommend?
Oh gosh. There's a couple of my early episodes of my podcast that I would not recommend. Like me, honestly, I think it was like episode 3 or something like that of my podcast where I was like doing the WWE drafts like all by myself. I've only done like maybe 5 solo shows on my podcast because I realized I just can't, it's so weird talking to the mic like myself. And so then I'm just like, a couple of my early episodes where I hated my voice and like editing was a whole process. Like, I'm so sorry in advance, but I mean, it's cool to look back on and see how much I've grown. But content wise, honestly, there's a lot. I think a lot of it though is like I would say my in-person interviews that are on SC Scoops, because that for me was huge and I've grown so much since then. Like Empower Weekends was my first ever in-person interviews. And so I think that series where I interviewed like I think I interviewed like 8 people that weekend, like all in person. And so for me, looking back on those, I think is a cool moment. And then any interview I do with Deanna Perrazzo, because I just love working with her.
Okay. So as we wrap this up, where can the good people find you? Ella?
So the easiest way to find me is on Twitter at It's Ella J. That's ITSELLAJAY. And then if you go to the link in my bio, there is a link tree with all my links to all the podcast and wrestling sites and everything I'm doing pretty much in merch and all of that good stuff. That's the easiest way.
It's well worth doing, guys. One of probably my favorite underrated people in the wrestling media, but probably one of the nicest people in the wrestling media as well. So if you guys like this video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talks Rubbish. Help the channel grow, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Bye.